Lots of people hunt for the best DAC amp combos. Scouring the internet, you will come across every type of opinion, discussing nearly every kind of option, from cheap to extortionately expensive. There are some hi-fi companies that try to compete with each other, which sometimes results in unique creations. Today, we're taking a look at the Audirect Beam 4, a nearly $250 portable DAC amp that aims to take a slice out of the available market. The folks at Hi-Fi Go sent me the Beam 4 to review. Hi-Fi Go is among a few retailers that specializes in audiophile gear, mainly from China. These guys have nearly every conceivable type of DAC, amp, and IEM that you might currently drool over. Check out Hi-Fi Go if you're in the market to spend your money. Now, on to the Beam 4. Audirect makes many portable DAC amps, and all that I've tested so far perform quite well. They are typically below the $150 price range, but the Beam 4 breaks that price category altogether. Here, the Beam 4 offers an implementation of the ESS9281A, a DAC chipset that is found in several other products. This includes the FIO KA1, an unknown Amazon product under the name Ever Solo H1, and of course in the previous iteration of the Beam 3S. This DAC can support every resolution under PCM and DSD up to DSD 512. The Beam 4 transfers Apple lossless, but does not cater to MQA. This device has 3 gain modes, a single-ended and balanced 4.4mm output. One of the key features is that the Beam 4 has an internal battery, something that previous versions of this product have lacked. When you plug the Beam 4 into your source, the device will use USB power to supplement its battery power. There's a controller in the unit that triggers when its battery is low. The Beam will draw power from your source only when the battery is providing low voltage. Audirect says that through balanced output, we should get a maximum of 230 milliwatts at 32 ohms and nearly 28 milliwatts at 600 ohms. Audirect claims interesting sonic performance for the Beam 4. First, they say that the full frequency band has a certain thickness with amazing density, overall delivering a balanced, clear-sounding DAC amp. They also say that the device has been, quote, professionally adjusted to deliver a properly balanced 3-frequency response, end quote. Later, they also say that the Beam 4 has a balanced, delicate, yet transparent sound. The company does not provide frequency measurements or any measurements at all. Frankly, the commentary about the Beam 4's sound signature or tuning is rather contradictory. Either it is purposefully tuned for balanced signature, whatever that's supposed to mean for Audirect, or it's transparent. The two are mutually exclusive. Let's move on to the device's build quality. The Beam 4 has kind of an Astle and Kern aesthetic. The angles, metal construction, and simple, unlabeled buttons give that vibe. The Beam 4 is a fairly large and, frankly, heavy device for a portable DAC amp. It is leagues different from the previous iterations of the Beam. The top plate houses the USB-C connection. You have to use a compatible USB-C to Lightning cable for iOS devices that still currently use Lightning ports. The top also houses the built-in microphone. The right side contains the power and gain buttons. The left side houses the playback buttons. There's volume up, which doubles for previous track, play and pause, and volume down, which doubles for next track. The front of the device houses 3 small LEDs. The top LED will indicate the battery level when plugged into a source. When you turn the device on, the lower LED will turn on to indicate the gain level. There's a third LED at the bottom of the front, and this will indicate audio resolution. The bottom of the Beam 4 houses the 2 headphone outputs. Overall, the build quality is quite good. All the buttons are tactile, clicky, and do not exhibit any wiggle. The design is unpretentious, yet still eye-catching. For every DAC or amp review, I conduct the same tests. Simply listening and making judgment calls I don't think is enough, as subjective impressions alone can be incredibly misleading. On the other hand, looking just at measurements can give a false sense of knowledge when you have not actually used the device. I combine measurements, when available, with subjective listening impressions, but I make my listening tests as repeatable and science-backed as I can. This is why I rigorously conduct A/B comparisons, explain what I did, and encourage others to do the same. To that end, I tested the Beam 4 in multiple phases. In Phase 1, I used the Beam 4 as one of my go-to devices for several weeks. I plugged it into my desktop, laptop, iPad, and iPhone along with my LG V30 and Windows computers. I listened to high-resolution lossless files, streamed lossy content, and consumed a variety of other content. I used numerous headphones and IEMs through both the balanced and single-ended outputs. The idea in this phase was to determine if the device exhibited any odd behavior, incompatibility, or defects through regular use. In Phase 2, I compared the Beam 4 against some alternatives. This included the Low 2-Paw S1, EcoZerta ITM03, Colorfly CDA M1, and the Audirect Beam 3 Pro. I plugged each device into my Windows and Mac systems and sent signal to two at once using Voicemeeter Banana on Windows and Multi-Output device on Mac. I plugged the single-ended output into a passive A/B switch and used various headphones and IEMs to conduct numerous hours-long comparisons over several days. I tried to volume match using the built-in amps of the devices when available and through system volume controls. The goal was to determine if the Beam 4 presented an obviously different sound from its competitors. In Phase 3, I plugged low and high impedance headphones into the Beam 4 to figure out if the device could drive them. I used dynamic and planar headphones and IEMs for this portion of the test. Throughout this process, I used many headphones and IEMs. The list includes the Focal Elex and Utopia, Beyerdynamic DT880, Avantone Planar, Audeze LCD2 Classic and LCD1, the Allo Audio S5X, the Moondrop Aria, 10 Hi-Fi T2, 7Hz Timeless, Final Audio B2, and some others. I strongly encourage people to conduct these types of true volume-matched A/B tests at home. For about $25, you can find the necessary off-the-shelf components to create your own test bench. If you want less reviewer and fanboy BS, I think you need to establish a reliable, repeatable testing method that mitigates against the typical audiophile nonsense. Let's dive into the results of the test. In Phase 1, I used the Beam 4 for several weeks to determine if it exhibited any faults or odd behavior. The answer, in short, is no. This DAC amp never let me down. It never failed to connect to my various devices. Its buttons never got stiff or difficult to push over time. I never heard any distortion or noise from the headphone sections. The gain will change immediately upon selecting through its options. There is no delay, no harsh pop or clicking. Just be careful at what volume you have before going to the next higher gain. The onboard playback controls worked flawlessly. On my Mac, the controls functioned with Spotify and Amazon Music. However, I could not use any of these media functions when listening to YouTube or Audirect 3.5. You have to turn the Beam 4 on when plugged into a source. It will not automatically do it by itself. This, I think, was implemented because the Beam 4 relies upon its internal battery first. You can turn the Beam 4 on without plugging it into a source, but I don't see the value in doing that. The Beam 4 does get warm over protracted use. At the end of about an hour-long listening session, the device was moderately hot, but not difficult or painful to hold in the hand. In total, the Beam 4 worked flawlessly. In Phase 2, I compared the Beam 4 against the various alternatives I previously mentioned. Audirect claims some kind of special tuning for the Beam 4, but their statements are blatantly contradictory. And since I could not find any measurements to help clarify the confusion, all I can do is to try to reach a sensible conclusion based upon strict A/B tests. Volume matching is absolutely critical in these scenarios. A noticeable change in volume in one device could subjectively make someone think that a device sounds cleaner, softer, more laid back, or more detailed, harsher, or has a treble spike. Here, the Beam 4 sounded identical to the other portables I compared against. Volume matching, as I already said, is critical, and doing constant A/B switching will help determine if any audible differences are actually there, or if those are false impressions brought on by improper volume matching, or simply our brains assuming an alteration because of the marketing material. This result makes sense as well when compared to the ESS material about this particular DAC chipset. There is no mention whatsoever that this particular chip does anything other than faithfully decode digital to analog. And while Audirect says their Beam 4 is professionally tuned to present a balanced sound, the company makes no explanation whatsoever to clarify this statement. Audirect contradicts its own statements when they claim that the Beam 4 sounds transparent, so it really does not make any sense what they're talking about. Look, I personally have experienced harsh ESS DACs in the distant past. Around 2010, I stopped using any devices with Sabre chipsets because I always thought that they had a harsh treble spike or sounded, for the lack of a better word, grainy. But the fact remains that modern DACs are so well made and programmed to turn digital to analog in as one-to-one conversion as possible that differences among DACs are frankly rare. When you conduct true volume-matched A/B tests using a passive switch box and a standardized testing method, this fact is impossible to ignore unless you have an agenda to ignore it. Now, finally on to Phase 3, wherein I plugged various headphones and IEMs from the spectrum of impedances into the Beam 4. I wanted to know what this device could drive and what it could not. When using the balanced output, the Beam 4 can easily power many planar magnetic headphones. This includes the Headphone planar and everything that audeze currently makes. Dynamic drivers are very easy to drive as a general rule, and I never struggled to power any such headphones through both single-ended and balanced output. This meant that my Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm headphone, yes, did get loud enough, but I also made several videos a couple of years ago about the DT880 600 ohm variant requiring high output impedance from the amplifier. So really, the Beam 4 is not suited for the 880 in this particular context. On the other hand, my Beyerdynamic T1 2nd Gen had no problem getting loud enough for me on the Beam 4. And frankly, when we get right down to it, we don't really have a ton of 600 ohm headphones in the audiophile community, so it's not really that big an issue. On the other hand, I would not use the Beam 4 for very hard to drive headphones like the Argons. The power requirements of that headphone simply are not met here. But feel free to use any IEM and the vast majority of headphones on the Beam 4 without worry that you don't get enough power. This is especially the case if you use the 4.4mm output. Ultimately, the Beam 4 is a well-performing, powerful, and transparent DAC amp. The portable DAC amp landscape is littered with all types of products. You can find anything within any budget. The Beam 4 needs to provide enough in exchange for its near $250 price tag. And I don't know if it really has enough in features for that amount of money. It can support all forms of high-resolution audio and even Apple lossless, but it does not cater to MQA. While MQA is a tiny minority of available content, it does take out a user base that might otherwise have been interested in this device when Audirect simply decides not to even implement MQA, especially when the DAC chipset could support it. The lack of Bluetooth means that the Beam 4 is less useful than it really could be. It's a huge device in comparison to many portables, and there really should be enough room for a Bluetooth module in here. The onboard media controls are quite nice, but I wonder when you'd actually use them. As a desktop unit, reaching across your desk to click one of the buttons on the Beam 4 is far less convenient than hitting a macro key or simply using your mouse. The Beam 4's media buttons make more sense while used in conjunction with a mobile device, but that will depend on each individual user. I appreciate the power output of the Beam 4. I think this is where it does quite well. You get plentiful power for the vast majority of headphones and IEMs, especially through balanced connection. But it seems to me that the Beam 4 is missing some key features that would have made it stand out. There is no EQ whatsoever. There is no mobile application, there's no desktop application, which, to be fair, is at least consistent with almost all DAC manufacturers. The failure to implement Bluetooth takes a lot of utility away from a device that, in price, competes directly with devices like the Scanline UP4 and UP5, along with the FIO BTR series. Finally, I'm not remotely convinced that the Beam 4 sounds anything other than transparent. If Audirect really tuned the DAC in some way, then they should indicate how and what we need to do in order to consistently hear those purported alterations. Having said that, I have no issues at all with the Beam 4 sonic performance, and I think it is excellent in its own right. The Beam 4 does offer its own uniqueness, and if you do not want the things that it does not have, then this device might be a very good candidate as your next purchase.